Please listen to this. In today's Money Power Politics, private prisons, they are cashing in on President Trump's Get Tough policies at the border. Since 1997, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has paid private companies to build and operate prisons to ease capacity at government-run facilities. The share of federal prisoners nationwide held in private prisons has surged from just 3% in the late 90s to more than 20% today. The biggest factor fueling growth is, you guessed it, immigration detention centers. Who are these companies? CoreCivic, also known as CCA Management and Training Corporation, known as MTC, and the GEO Group are three of the biggest players in the private prison business. Together, they operate some 14 federal facilities nationwide, providing 27,000 beds for federal inmates, and that is growing. That growth was under threat when the Obama administration attempted to phase out all contracts with private prisons. The big three players decided to take action, and they spent big on the 2016 campaign. Guess how? GEO donated $1.1 million to Republican candidates and political action committees. CoreCivic spent another $1.1 million on lobbying efforts, and MTC spent nearly $500,000 to do the same. And those efforts, they certainly paid off. When President Trump reversed the phase-out decision early in his administration, that is despite a 2014 lawsuit accusing GEO of forcing immigration detainees to work for little or no pay by threatening them with solitary confinement. Sounds like slavery, doesn't it? Critics say the private prison business model encourages cost-cutting and even slavery to boost its bottom-line profits. And guess what? It's working. Since President Trump's election, shares for GEO have shot up 25%, while CoreCivic stock is 12% higher. MTC is not publicly traded, but its revenues are said to be robust. I want to point out some of the largest shareholders, if you want to check your 401k, BlackRock and Vanguard. And granted, they may own them as part of an index, but they choose to do that. I want to bring my panel back in. Tim, Brendan, Tim, help me understand this. So, private prisons, they've got political action committees. They donate to campaigns. They specifically gave a ton of money to the Trump campaign. And this seems to be working. Oh, and by the way, they run as a 501(c), a nonprofit. How does this work?
Well, also remember, this goes back to the mid-'90s, so this can't just simply be, hung on the Trump administration. It collides with this issue of mass incarceration in the United States and a lack of facilities to house not just migration detainees, but prisoners, people who went into the general prison population. Clinton decided to privatize some of this simply to deal with this volume of people coming into the system. Privatization created this great opportunity for both the stock market, investors, and private companies to make a killing.
We should point out, though, that there are instances where privatization is a good thing. Operational excellence, cost cutting. If you leave it to the government, it could get fatter and fatter. And when you put private business in there, sometimes it does work.
But the issue there, then, is what do you want a prison to do? If it's just going to house people and not rehabilitate people, then fine. Have the most heinous, non-rehabilitative environment you want for a prisoner that's supported by a private entity. I think the problem, if you want them to be entities that rehabilitate people, they have to approach that in a very nuanced way, and it's not just about cost cutting. And what you're seeing in all of these ugly figures about how much money they're making, how much compensation the executives get, and the conditions inside the facilities, it's all in opposition to one another because there's a lot of cost cutting going on.
I'm with Tim. I hope that one consequence of what we're seeing at the border is that we start to pay more attention to the private prison industrial complex all over the country. And I agree with Tim as well. This is not a Trump problem. This is an America problem. These are three-strike sentencing policies that go back to the 80s, right? That increase the jail populations, the way we handle drugs in this country. There are a bunch of reasons why we created these industries, and these industries do what industries do. They found a new opportunity, and they're chasing it through lobbying.
The thing I think that does stick to Trump is this ramp up in spending prior to the enactment of their zero tolerance policy. They clearly said, we are going to divide families, and we need some place to stick them. And this, bounty of new contracts went out.
When I look at the tent city in Tonillo, Texas, tens of millions of dollars are being spent on these facilities. Tenillo, Texas is one of the poorest areas. They don't even have clean water there. Imagine if the money being spent on the policy created by Trump actually helped our poorest Americans. We talk about Trump's base likes this because they feel left out. You know what would make them feel included? If you went to that rural community, if you put workforce development programs in, if you created fast Wi-Fi, yes,
schools.
that would actually serve them rather than, to your point, this political theater. This is massively expensive. And you know who's winning? The private prisons, investors.
I mean, we can talk about efficiencies through privatization, but you know who's still paying for this is taxpayers.
That's right.
Right? This is tax money. I mean, one of the things that frustrates me about sort of the way policy has been conducted since the beginning of this administration, they have a rural base, right? That's great. There are huge problems in rural America that could be solved with infrastructure spending. Remember how it's always supposed to be infrastructure week? Every number you look at, income, wealth, home ownership, health, everything you look at in America, there's a massive gap between people who live in cities and people who live in rural America. And there are things that we could be doing. There is money that we could be spending to actually
help them.
To actually change this. And instead, we're spending...
Which gives rise to two issues. One is, when is the rural voter going to get hip to the fact that the President of the United States, who campaigned saying he was going to provide jobs and change their standards of living, isn't actually doing that? When is that going to finally get traction?
It's going to happen when Democrats figure out that politics is downstream from culture.
When I watch Laura Ingraham say these camps are like boarding schools and summer camps, if they're that nice, imagine if we were putting those kind of resources to helping people who actually need it. By no means is this an America First policy. If you care about the forgotten American, I don't understand why this works. You're spending our tax dollars. You are deporting people who actually would fill jobs that we need filled here. Who does this serve? I mean, I just keep looking at how much money these private prisons are making.
It serves the political theater that President Trump campaigned on and is still trying to make hay off in office, which is that there are crises that he's going to solve, that China is a threat and he's going to blister them with trade sanctions. Migration across the southern border is a threat and he's going to build a wall. He has this simplistic black and white view of the world that actually isn't compatible with getting things done and helping our economy grow.
Well, the business community or the investor community this year has decided to say, we are going to step up. We do care about conscious capitalism. We are going to do the right thing. So for those who are saying, I'm not comfortable, but then they look at their 401k and say, it looks like I'm invested in these companies. What do?
I mean, they've kind of decided to do that, but there isn't a really good market yet for people who want to invest, with their conscience. It doesn't exist yet.
You don't have to be 100% with your conscience, but here, if you simply want to say private prisons, no bueno, what do?
I think we have to rely on the companies that we invest our money with to make these decisions, and they honestly haven't done it yet. They talk about it, they feel uncomfortable about it, but really, we were talking about ETFs, right? This collection of stocks.
Yes, when I call some of these huge money managers and I say, I thought you said you wanted to do the right thing. What's up with investing? They go, oh, it's in an index. What can we do?
But this is another.
This is similar to the gun debate. So it's very, it lines up with the gun debate.
I think we need to, but I mean, the problem with how we invest for retirement in America is so fraught that if we want to really talk about what we need from those companies in terms of solid retirement plans, like where do we even begin? Yes, I would like to not be invested in private prisons, but there are a ton of things that I would like to change about the American retirement system. Again, there are real problems in America. Massive gap between rural and urban. A huge, the average amount saved, if you've saved anything for retirement, it's $60,000 in America. That is not enough to retire on. These are very real problems. Underfunded pensions. We aren't prepared for these things. These are policy problems that we're not doing anything about. My frustration as a policy journalist is I keep trying to look at this and read things. I talk to you about what are we going to do? We'll shift some money over here. None of it matters. We're not doing anything about any of the problems.
When you make your voice deeper, though, it really, there's more of an impact.
We're participating in theater. We're watching theater. What we're doing at this table is theater criticism.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.